Today on Jay Sekulow Live, breaking news, shocking developments in the Michael Flynn case, both in the judge's decision-making and in unmasking, even by a current top presidential candidate. We'll talk about it on Jay Sekulow Live.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
So we're refocusing on two major developments that are brand new in the Michael Flynn case. First, Rick Rennell, he declassified the names. He turned them over to the Senate. They've been now released, of those who requested the unmasking of Mike Flynn. We're going to go through this because the ACLJ has a lot of evidence that did in our FOIA work actually back in the spring and summer of 2019. For those of you watching on Facebook and Periscope, I'm holding our hand. This is our FOIA quarterly report. So this is from last summer where we pulled this information and the timeline that tracks exactly with these unmasking requests. But guess who was the final person to put in an unmasking request on Mike Flynn? 8 days, okay? 8 days before President Trump took office, Vice President Joe Biden, now the Democrat candidate who is attempting to defeat President Trump as the other major party candidate. He was the last person in the Obama administration to make the request. We also have a bizarre new order from the judge in the Flynn case.
We'll get to that in a second. But the first unmasking is from Samantha Powers, the UN ambassador. What she was doing involved in this raises a whole series of questions that we don't even have time to get into today. But that was the first one. And then, as Jordan said, it ends with the vice president. Then, the United States of America versus Michael Flynn, Judge Sullivan appoints an Amicus curiae, a former trial court, district court judge, to basically serve, in my view, and this is how I analyze it, Andy, I think he's serving as a special counsel, special prosecutor against Flynn.
Yeah, but basically he is just another prosecutor appointed now by a judge. So the judicial power of Judge Sullivan has moved over, and he has also become the executive branch of government prosecuting people in addition to sentencing them.
Yeah, and Andy, collectively, you and I have been practicing law like 90 years. I've never heard of anything like this in my life. Never in my life have I heard of anything like what Judge Sullivan has done in the last 2 days with these two orders. These are incredible. I can't believe that the judge has become unhinged. The judge in the case is appointing another judge, a retired judge, to basically prosecute. Jordan could read the order.
This is a
Michael Flynn, after the Department of Justice says we're withdrawing the prosecution.
This is a judge, former judge, now in a law firm, a partner in a law firm, who's been highly critical of President Trump. So very partisan guy. He's the judge ordered that the court exercise what he's calling inherent authority. That's something
judge,
new.
By the way, that 27 times said no third-party amicus curiae briefs in the Flynn case.
To appoint the Honorable John Gleeson as amicus curiae, and he tells him what he's going to be arguing, not just to say, get his opinion on it even, but to argue in opposition to the government's motion to dismiss, and then orders that the amicus curiae will address whether the court should issue an order to show cause why Mr. Flynn should not be held in criminal contempt for perjury. Also, what's interesting in this order, Dad, is that in yesterday's minute order from Judge Sullivan, it made it look like we could file an amicus brief.
That's not so clear from
this.
Not
so clear now because he's appointing the amicus, which isn't that bizarre. In a sense, are they amicus? No, they're special counsel because amicus briefs are filed on your own volition.
Well, look what he's ordered to do.
He's told what
being
to do.
asked, shall address whether the court should issue an order to show cause why General Flynn should not be held in contempt of perjury because of his pleas, which were done under incredible duress, as you can imagine. They were threatening his son. I mean, this is just, does this tell you what we're dealing with, folks? How much clearer could we possibly be? From the moment the rush, and this is all, by the way, Andy, very quickly, 15 seconds, all at the feet of Robert Mueller.
Everything that is here and that is before the court is the result of the Mueller investigation and his ineptitude.
All right, folks, when we come back, we'll continue to start taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. We'll go more into this unmasking timeline, which ends with Vice President Biden, but starts with a lot of top officials and information the ACLJ has uncovered through FOIA. We'll be right back.
Federal Judge Emmett Sullivan has appointed a retired judge to argue against the Justice Department's motion to dismiss charges against Mike Flynn and instead make the case for sending him to prison.
We asked the court to drop the case against Michael Flynn because knowing what we now know, we believe this case should never have been brought. It did not meet our standards, and we believe we have a duty to correct that.
I mean, this is an outrageous decision by a judge who's now placed himself into that, awful category of an activist who's willing to set aside rules, set aside ethics, set aside precedent, and just go in a direction because he is politically motivated to do so.
It is absolutely foreign to any judge to even consider bringing in another judge to co-pilot a case.
That, to me, sounds like a judge not being a judge or not being impartial, but actually becoming part of the prosecution, and that's a really big mistake.
President Clinton made Sullivan a U.S. District Court judge 24 years ago. Since then, he has been known for colorful, controversial rulings and comments against both political parties, sometimes directing his most stinging criticism toward prosecutors.
I've never seen anything like what Judge Sullivan is doing, and if you're going to pick someone to look into it, don't pick someone who's already made up his mind that Bill Barr made a mistake. I mean, you talk about bias, you talk about prejudice. The person he's picked has already expressed an opinion on the outcome of this case.
This is a case that involves the government and a defendant, the United States, Michael Flynn. The judge has an obligation to rule on the case before him. It is not complicated. This defendant was someone that was targeted by the judge. This judge needs to recuse himself. He should be embarrassed to put a robe on.
There'll probably be a writ of mandamus filed by Flynn's attorneys to a higher court. And Emmett Sullivan, who frankly has no business being on the bench.
All right, folks, 1-800-684. All right, we're taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. There's two kind of paths that's shocking new developments with Michael Flynn. One is we've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask Michael Flynn. And they are the top officials. They are the names we have discussed often on this broadcast. And we compared that. We had our ACLJ attorneys and Ben Cisney go through this with Than Bennett, our government affairs director, and kind of put the timeline together about how this worked with the FOIA information we got back in the spring and summer of last year. So we're taking spring and summer of last year, Dad,
right,
and we're combining it to the information now that tracks this unmasking order, which gives the dates on it. This is what was released, and putting it with our FOIA info.
So I'm holding my hand for those that are watching on TV. Or Facebook or Periscope. This is just a quarterly FOIA report. And Ben Cisney and our team in Washington and Than will give you some details on this before we go through the particulars. These are painstaking pieces of litigation, Than, that you and Ben Cisney and others have been engaged in, and it's slow-moving because it's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget, and we sure found a couple here.
Absolutely, Jay. I mean, we're still litigating these cases to this day, and we've said on this broadcast many times that the goal here is to gather the puzzle pieces. Sometimes you don't know which ones will be important until they become important. I'll tell you what, Jay, we've got an awful lot of puzzle pieces today in light of the list that Jordan's talking about of officials who unmasked members of the incoming Trump administration. Jay, I'll just give you two top-line takeaways, and then we can work through some of this as the show goes on. But it is now conclusively a fact, and we can demonstrate it through our FOIA documents, that the same people who were working to unmask General Flynn and others were the people who were trying to rush through that expansion of access to raw signal intel data. We have conclusive proof on down the line from James Clapper and others that they were the same people. And then, Jay, we also have conclusive proof. We had this yesterday, but this went all the way to the White House, to the Oval Office, to President Obama on January 5th. After that meeting in the Oval Office, who was one of the people that made an unmasking request? It was Dennis McDonough, the chief of staff to President Obama. And I will tell you, Jay, that is the same as President Obama making that unmasking request.
This is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I want to play this. This is George Stephanopoulos 4 days ago asking Joe Biden about this, but before Joe Biden got exposed. So take a listen, because he's either very forgetful, and if he's this forgetful, he should not be running for president of the United States. But he's a liar, is what Joe Biden is, and he lied on national television to George Stephanopoulos, who should be calling him out on it now.
Let's see what he
Let's
says.
see if they do next week by 5.
What did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was there anything improper done?
I know nothing about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn.
I do want to press that. You say you didn't know anything about it, but you were reported to be at a January 5th, 2017 meeting where you and the president were briefed on the FBI's plan to question Michael Flynn over those conversations he had with the Russian ambassador Kislyak.
No, I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know.
Okay, 7 days after he was in the meeting with the president on the FBI's plan to go question Flynn, a week later, with only 8 days left in the Obama term and the vice president's term, guess who's the final unmasker of Michael Flynn? Put in the final unmasking request. You got it. Forgetful or liar, Joe Biden. It's only one of the two. He either is not fit to be president because he doesn't know what he's done in his career and he's got some issues going on, or two, he's a liar.
Or, as Andy has said,
protect the king.
The job was protect the king. Andy?
Yes, you always protect the king. You always protect, in Obama's case, the emperor. You do anything you can to protect him and insulate him from any suggestion that he did anything wrong. And all these people, all these intimates of his that are listed as those who sought to unmask various people through these mechanisms that they used, were there to protect Obama. This was the legacy. You don't understand the idolatry that they feel for this man and what they would do for him, and even to the point of falling on their own swords, Jay.
So let's go through some of this. There were 49 requests by 39 Obama administration officials that include Joe Biden
and this is just on
the president's
General
chief
Flynn.
of staff, just to unmask his name.
Okay. And remember, folks, we got this by litigating the FOIA request.
Yeah, so starting in November 10th of 2016, you have Obama telling President-elect Trump not to hire General Flynn. In our ACLJ FOIA on November 10th, just 2 days after President Trump's election, we found out that Obama's chief of staff emails a reply to Samantha Power, copying Susan Rice, tells her Obama is, quote, going to go away in December and that she should go away as well. The ACLJ obtained this document in our unmasking FOIA lawsuit against the State Department and NSA, which we are still actively litigating. Then November 18th, 2016, President-elect Trump names General Flynn National Security Advisor designee. On November 30th, this is now after President Trump is president of the United, not yet, he's not yet president, but he is, the election's gone on. This is during the transition. So November 30th, this is when the unmasking begins. November 30th, 2016. So this is all the very end of the Obama administration. I mean, literally, they're on their way out. They're in their last month when this starts. You have a Flynn unmasking request by Ambassador to the UN Samantha Power. Our ACLJ of FOIA obtained emails sent on November 30th, 2016, which we got from the ODNI and the Director of National Intelligence in our FOIA lawsuit on the last-minute rule change to increase access to intelligence that shows O'Sullivan was part of the conversation in the loop on the last-minute rule change to increase access to raw signal intel. O'Sullivan was one of the unmasters exposed yesterday. December 2nd, so a couple days later, you have a Flynn unmasking request by Samantha Power, the UN ambassador. And at the same day, an unmasking request by James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. December 7th, you get another unmasking request by Samantha Power.
And all of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
Then on December 14th, a Flynn unmasking request by CIA Director John Brennan. Then a Flynn unmasking request.
I think you may see these names in other cases going forward. Maybe.
By Ambassador to the UN Samantha Power
seems like
twice.
They were involved.
Secretary of the Treasury, Jacob Lew. Director of the FBI, Jim Comey.
Okay, stop with Jacob Lew for a second.
Yeah.
And I'll ask Sandy, what would Jacob Lew, the Director of the Treasury, have to do with unmasking? Were they thinking he was running money for the Russians?
This is something that's so fantastic. When I saw the name of Jacob Lew, who was the Secretary of the Treasury on that list, it was absolutely mind-boggling to me. What in the world would the Secretary of the Treasury have to do with making an unmasking request? I cannot conceive of a reason for that.
Okay, Fan, you head up our government affairs. What government affair was he involved in besides unmasking?
Yeah, I can conceive of a reason, Jay. Everybody in the Obama inner circle was focused on this down the stretch. The United Nations ambassador was not focusing on international affairs, even though there were a lot of them to focus on. The Secretary of the Treasury was not focusing on economic issues, even though there were a lot of them to focus on. Jay, everybody that had the confidence of the former president was focused on these two things: unmasking incoming officials and expanding access to raw intel data to dramatically more agencies so that this information would be accessible to more people. And Jay, we are only a couple of pages through the evidence that Jordan has started laying out. And to be honest with you, even though we're litigating this in court, we're still pouring through it because these documents are so relevant when laid against the names that Rick Grinnell released a couple of days. I'll say it again. Everybody in Obama's inner circle was not focused on their job. They were focused on unmasking and making sure that more people had access to this intelligence.
You know, if you're watching on Facebook or listening by radio, I want you to share this feed with your friends right now, because we're going to get into this in the next segment of what this means. Because at the same time, I want you to understand all of this government, the machinery of government being put against General Flynn. We haven't gotten to what the FBI did, right, when Comey brings up the agents.
No.
And then when the Department of Justice finds out there's wrongdoing in the investigation, tries to get it undone, what happens? The judge goes with basically appointing a special counsel. We'll talk about that when we come back from this break.
Yeah,
so folks, your support of the ACLJ allows this to happen too, by the way.
I mean, listen to this. So December 15th, 2016, we're moving on past Jacob Lew. There's a Flynn unmasking request by Jim Comey, directly by Jim Comey, not by his deputy, not by his assistant. It's interesting how these unmasking requests have come through. I mean, the only one that I think was by an assistant was the Obama's chief of staff. A chief of staff to the president is only doing it for the president. So, I mean, he's implicated here, President Obama, and he already was because he was telling DOJ officials about this. But there was also a Flynn unmasking request again by CIA Director John Brennan. That was his second in 2 days. The ACLJ FOIA that matches up with this. In our last-minute rule change to increase access to raw signal intelligence FOIA lawsuit, ACLJ obtained emails that reveal that, as per 2.3 SSC meeting today, to confirm that D&I Clapper did in fact sign the availability procedure on December 15th. This is right between his own two unmasking requests on December 2nd and 28th. This is what expanded the access to the intel community to all of this different intel, to all those different agencies. Okay, that only gets us through December 15th. There's a lot more. We come back on Jay Sekulow Live. If you want to talk to us in there, 1-800-684-3110. We haven't gotten to Biden unmasking yet, or the FBI agents going in. We'll get to it when we get back.
Newly declassified documents identifying more than a dozen Obama administration officials involved in the unmasking of Michael Flynn. And at the top of that list, former Vice President Joe Biden.
When I first came out publicly and held a press conference and said that I had seen very troubling activity of using intelligence reports and intelligence apparatus to spy on Trump transition officials, and they were doing unmaskings. You're getting a glimpse.
It's criminal. The more they found that General Flynn was innocent of anything, the more evidence the FBI came across that exonerated him of anything, the harder they worked to set him up for whatever they could make up against him, including all of the unmaskings that you see and how widely it went.
It should be and is illegal to listen to an American's conversation, and it's even worse if you're listening to an American who just happens to be your political opponent from the opposite party. So, no, this was a conspiracy of high-ranking Obama officials to try to falsely convict and taint a 33-year veteran of the military. I think it's reprehensible.
This is an outrage. It's at least unethical, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. They had no business listening to anything General Flynn was saying about Trump policy.
It was the greatest political crime in the history of our country. If I were a Democrat instead of a Republican, I think everybody would have been in jail a long time ago.
The American people will never have faith in the Justice Department, the FBI, or frankly, several of our intelligence agencies until there is an accounting.
You know, this is beyond the pale. Hey, folks on Facebook, I think we're at almost 9,000 folks right now watching. Go ahead and share it with your friends. Let's see if we can get more people involved in the conversation. Important information coming up here.
All right, just to walk you through this unmasking timeline, because there's been a lot about the names, but I don't think anybody's really put it together for everybody about why the timeline's important. The ACLJ can, because we have the FOIA information that we've been litigating in court to actually get this information and put together timelines for you.
There's the complaint. So those watching on Facebook or Periscope, you're seeing, or any other social media platforms where you're watching it, there is actually the complaint that we filed. That's one of them. That one's against the Department of the State Department. There were others as well, and we're still going through the information.
Oh, that's
we still
right.
get information.
Yeah, that's
All
right. Okay, so let's keep going on the timeline. December 23rd, there's another Flynn unmasking request by Samantha Power. December 28th, you've got the DNI, James Clapper, with another Flynn unmasking request. December 29, 2016, the incoming National Security Advisor, General Mike Flynn, has several phone conversations with a Russia ambassador to the United States, which is not an unusual thing to do during a presidential transition. Remember, President Trump and the new administration at this point in time would take office in less than 30 days. And Flynn had known Kislyak from his previous work at the Defense Intelligence Agency, which he headed up for President Obama until President Obama removed him from that post. But President Obama had him in that post. So January 5th, this is that meeting in the Oval Office where Sally Yates has testified. I know Andy doesn't believe it in the recently revealed House Intel Committee deposition, but they were under oath. That attended an Oval Office meeting that include President Obama, Jim Comey, Vice President Biden, CIA Director Brennan, Director of National Intelligence Clapper, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and others. And it was all about Flynn. And so Obama asked Yates and Comey to stay behind, and now we know that Susan Rice testified that Biden also stayed behind in that meeting, so that's something new.
So
Biden was there too. And that Obama was instructing Yates about what him and Jim Comey were cooking up.
So we've been able to put all of this together from those Freedom of Information Act
we
lawsuits
get more into that
we filed
2 days later.
Yeah, before we get to that, so I want to get a perspective here. So the unusual nature of this, Andy, is who's actually, Jordan gave that list of who's doing the unmasking, and it's a broad swath of the Obama administration.
It is. It's a very, when I saw the list and I went down who they were and what their titles were and their position, it was unbelievable to me how many people it covered and how high their positions were from the very second in command, the Vice President of the United States, all the way down to minor officials in intelligence agencies. This was clearly a target, and the target was General Flynn, and the person ultimately targeted was President Trump in an attempt to spy on him and to embarrass his administration and discredit those who were coming in to take over from Obama. That's what this was all about.
And I saw people like Ben Rhodes, who are advisors to President Obama, they're trying to say, they're just trying to make it look illegal what's routine intelligence. But as Andy said, there's a handful of like normal intelligence people on here, but then it's a bunch of directors. Why were the directors ordering it? Because here we go. The same day they have the meeting in the Oval Office with all those people, guess who's chief of staff unmasked Michael Flynn? Puts in the request. Obama's. The President of the United States. Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough. Now, I want you to put this in context because we had a President of the United States impeached over a phone call with 35 people listening with the President of Ukraine. Ask Mitt Romney now if he feels good about his vote on that. Because when you look at this, I know he's been highly critical of President Trump and all this COVID-19, but look at this, okay? The same day they met in the Oval Office, Obama's top person, basically, he does the work of the president. If the president asks to do something, the chief of staff is there to do it. That is the same as Obama putting in the request.
Oh, no,
because Dennis McDonough
whatsoever.
wasn't in the meeting. He wouldn't have known to put in the request if President Obama didn't tell him to.
No, of course.
So that's interesting. Then you go to January 7th, 2 days later. You get another Flynn unmasking request by DNI, James Clapper. You know these folks. But then the Deputy Director of National Intelligence also puts one in, Mike Dempsey. Then the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Stephanie O'Sullivan, puts one in. Now, in our ACLJ FOIA on January 7, 2017, this is when we obtained an email from Clapper to O'Sullivan and Dempsey, all three now unmaskers of Mike Flynn, in the NSA memo. And this is in our ACLJ FOIA on the last-minute rule change to increase access to raw signal intelligence.
Remember, we had that executive order that came in place at that time where it put all those different agencies, Stan, that was out of the ordinary.
No question about it. 2 quick points. One, to underscore the point that Jordan made. We have Susan Rice's own testimony that Joe Biden stayed behind before that Dennis McDonough unmasking request. So you only have to trust Obama's people that Joe Biden was in the room for that. Jay, on your question, this is the document Jordan's talking about, an email between James Clapper, Stephanie O'Sullivan, and Mike Dempsey. Here's why our documents are so important. When Rick Grinnell, the director of national intelligence, put out that list of unmaskers, Jay, I think everybody would have skipped right over Stephanie O'Sullivan and Mike Dempsey's name because they didn't know who they were. But we have a document showing that they were working with James Clapper to expand that raw signal intel to dramatically more agencies. So, Jay, here's the bottom line. The same people, whether they were high level or low level, that were working to unmask General Flynn, were also trying to give more people access. It is shocking how many high level officials are on it, but the low level officials that nobody knows about, Jay, they're involved for the same reason, because they were doing the work behind the scenes at the order of James Clapper.
All right, back to the
So January 10th, we have a redacted...
January 10th, you're talking days before the president's sworn in.
10 days before President Trump is sworn in. Another request by a CIA and a name is redacted there. Then another January 11th, 9 days before the president's sworn in, Ambassador Samantha Power to the UN. She puts in another request. Then in our FOIA, ACLJ obtained Clapper's signature on this date, January 11th, on a memo distributing the new intelligence access procedures. He said, quote, I am pleased to share with you the procedures called for by Section 2.3 of Executive Order 12333. That's the one that you just mentioned, Ed, that opened up signal intel to basically everybody in the intelligence world.
So here's what I want everybody to understand. We're going to get into this in the next half hour. If you don't get the full hour of the broadcast, just go over to aclj.org or Periscope or Facebook and follow this, because in the second half hour, I'm going to get into now this appointment, all this leading to the prosecution of Flynn, and then ultimately the appointment of the judge.
We're about to get to Flynn being approached by the FBI agents. So January 12th, this is key for the election coming up, too. Flynn unmasking request by Vice President Joe Biden. It's the final one we have from the NSA that's been released. It was Joe Biden, not his assistant, not his chief of staff, but the request was actually made by Vice President Joe Biden. There was the same day another one made by Jacob Lew. Same day, the Washington Post reported that Flynn had these phone calls, which means it was leaking, and that they were leaking this out. And note that it wasn't just the Washington Post. The Washington Post, at David Ignatius, another Washington Post reporter, put at a Georgetown law panel that day that sources start whispering to me that there were all these mysterious communications between Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador Kislyak. Now, those they were private. They should be classified, but they're not weird because he was incoming National Security Advisor. January 24th, this is when Flynn is approached by the FBI agents for review.
And when we come back from the break...
President Trump is president then.
Okay, so we've given the whole timeline. And now we're up to the point of the FBI interviewing General Flynn. We're going to play that sound from James Comey when we come back, where he talks about sneaking. And there we'll get Andy's comments on that. We're going to take it all the way through to this judge's order that he issued yesterday, which in our view was appointing a special counsel, which I don't think he has the inherent authority to do. But anyways, that tells you the nature of it. But your support of the ACLJ has allowed us to get this information. How? Litigating freedom of information cases. Let me put that lawsuit back up there on the screen for those watching. There it is. That's what we're doing. Your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference.
That's right. You can always donate online at aclj.org. It's quick, it's easy, it's secure, and it's the best way. Support the ACLJ right now. Mail is still a slow process as with COVID-19, but those online donations get right to the ACLJ immediately. Donate online at aclj.org, and you're seeing how this work all comes together.
We're in a fight for life that is incredible right now. Barbaric and horrific. This is the New York State's law on unrestricted abortion. No protection for the unborn child.
Not only did they pass it, they celebrated it.
Zero protection. Used to have personhood protection.
Right.
Now they don't.
That is now all completely repealed.
We've handled a series of cases involving those that are being persecuted for their faith. They called it terrorism, but they actually use in the indictment itself the word Christianization.
A principal comes and yanks your Bible away.
A teacher became aware that the student was reading from the Bible.
We're here standing for these kids and their families.
Prohibited from meeting with other Christians during recess.
We do have to fight against them when they occur. Otherwise, those abuses will win the day.
This is a fight that you're going to have to be engaged in. It's already a long-term struggle. It is not over.
We are so grateful to the people who prayed for us, and we are so grateful for ACLJ.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. If you missed the first half hour of this broadcast, I encourage you to go back. What we did was we combined what we learned yesterday when the people who put in requests to unmask Michael Flynn, the unmasking requests from the Obama administration, all happening again, folks, within the last month and a half of the administration, up until literally 8 days before the administration would be out of office. And the last unmasking request we have is from Vice President Joe Biden himself.
That's going to take some explaining.
Not his chief of staff.
I mean, you think about that for a minute.
Well, because he told George Stephanopoulos that he knows nothing.
Right.
He knew nothing really. And then, I knew that there was going to be an investigation. But now we know he took like these active steps to get info on Mike Flynn. And why does he even need it 8 days out? He's going to have no role in government. FBI is going to do its thing. And so we have it all leading up, and we combined it with the FOIAs that we worked on about this and the intel community changing its intel rules. And this all started to match up with FOIA requests, Dan, that we have been working on and in court on since our quarterly report came out last summer.
Right.
Is where these came from. So we were able to almost add up each one of these dates with one of our information that we received from a FOIA, like an email on those same dates. Like the Oval Office meeting that everybody's talked about with Obama telling Sally Yates about what they were doing to Mike Flynn, about to do with Comey there. The same day, Dennis McDonough puts in, that's the Obama chief of staff at the time, puts in the request to unmask Mike Flynn.
All right, so here, for those of you that support the work of the ACLJ, you get these. This is our quarterly report. This one was from the spring and summer of last year when this litigation started. And now we've got all this information released, and we're able to take the information that we have. This is really important, that we get in these cases and then put that information into a timeline, and now other information comes out. So we now know that General Flynn was put in this unbelievable position. Then, after the unmasking takes place, James Comey, president sworn into office, James Comey decides it's time to get information on Flynn from Flynn himself. Remember the email. Do we want to get him to lie? Do we want to get him to get fired? Do we want to get him prosecuted? What do we want here? Which, Andy, that's not supposed to be the way they look at a case.
No, that's not the job of the FBI to create crimes, but to investigate facts that may show that crimes were committed. And here, this was clearly a case of entrapment. They had targeted a man. They were going to go get him, and they took advantage of what was happening at the early days of the Trump administration that Comey was laughing to his gaggle of liberal friends about. Who sent him in? Well, I did. Ha ha. Like that was something to laugh about. He ought to be crying about having done that.
All right. And then he makes this statement in an interview to Nicole Wallace about getting them in there and getting away with it in the interview of Flynn.
You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the same room. How did that happen?
I sent them.
Right there, I sent them, and he laughs. Like, this is funny. Trying to ruin a person's life. Now continue with the rest of it.
I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized.
All right. Probably wouldn't have done or gotten away with if it was more organized administration. Now listen to the rest.
Investigation, a more organized administration. In the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration, there was process. And so if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions.
But here, I'm not going to work through the White House counsel. I'm going to sneak the FBI agents in to set up the National Security Administrator.
Yeah, he tries to blame the Trump administration for being disorganized, but there was a White House counsel there.
Yes, there was.
Don McGahn could have gotten the phone call from Jim Comey.
But Jim Comey
didn't. So it wasn't
Jim
the disorganized.
Comey was a bad actor.
Yeah, he's a bad guy.
The vice president on this case is Vice President Biden fully involved now. He's got a lot of explaining to do.
Something else.
There's a lot more we're going to talk about when we come back from the break. There's a lot more ahead on this. We'll get everybody's comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think Obamagate becomes more and more real the more and more info we get. That this could be the most serious. They got caught, and they don't have Eric Holder there anymore to protect them as the Attorney General. They don't have their people in place, so the information is not being kept, secret. They're being exposed, and you see Obama is the worst of the worst kind of president. He targeted people through the IRS. He targeted Mike Flynn with the FBI, and he was having to tell DOJ officials about it. We'll be right back.
Judge Sullivan, of course, bringing on another judge to argue against the DOJ's call to dismiss the case. The Washington Post op-ed earlier this week on that. The Flynn case isn't over until the judge says it's over.
Former federal judge John Gleeson to present the arguments why the Department of Justice request to dismiss should not go for it, and they should figure out whether or not Flynn should be held in criminal contempt for perjury.
This morning, it was all the retired Watergate attorneys who want to come in, and now we're going to bring in someone else to tell the judge how to rule.
Can you discern anything other than a partisan political position for his actions in not taking the recommendation of the Department of Justice to drop the case against General Flynn?
I can't explain any legal basis for it right now.
I was in the criminal justice system for about 20 years. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I mean, judges don't prosecute cases. So, this judge may talk about perjury, but he's going to need to resign his job and go back to a United States Attorney's office if he wants to prosecute perjury cases.
He has had a fraudulent case in front of him now for how many years? And he has not interceded and said to the prosecution, you're trying to defraud my court, and I take that personally. But that has not been his response. It has been to be complicit with the prosecutors in carrying out a travesty against General Flynn.
So far, he's adopted the government's position on everything, and that can't keep standing in light of all the Brady violations that are disclosed by the government within the last 10 days to 2 weeks. It's absolutely astonishing, and this only adds to that.
We'll be right back live on the broadcast. Take your phone calls and comments.
Here we go.
All right, we're going to go right to the phones on this, 1-800-684-3110. I want to go to Betty in California because I think it sets the stage for this second part. We went through the unmasking and the shock. So we'll take your calls as well. But the second shocking development in the Flynn case, which was the order from Judge Sullivan in the D.C. court, the trial court level. But let's go to Betty in California, line 4. Betty, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Well, thank you for taking my call, and thank you for everything that you do. It really is great. My question is, I heard that there's the DOJ threw this out of the court, but there's a new judge that's trying to retry it. And so my question is, what does all that mean? And
yeah, so it's not. There's not a new judge trying the case. So General Flynn issued a plea as part of a deal initially with the Department of Justice. Then Bill Barr came in as Attorney General. All these irregularities started coming to light when Sidney Powell, the lawyer for General Flynn, started looking at the data and requesting documents, and all this exculpatory evidence came forward. And Andy, just to put it in process here, once the exculpatory evidence comes forward, that means during the course of the proceeding, the U.S. attorneys that were handling it did not comply with what's called the Brady rule. Explain that to people.
Okay, there's a case called Brady versus Maryland that was decided in 1963, and all it says is this: government, if you've got any information that exculpates a defendant, that exonerates that a defendant, that shows that a defendant is not guilty of the crime that you are charging him with or her with, you've got to disclose that information to the defense. And if you don't, the prosecution ends. It's a nullity. It no longer can proceed forward. Mueller and his team of prosecutors did not disclose material information under the Brady case to the attorneys for General Flynn. It's a tainted prosecution. It should not have proceeded. It's the easiest case to prove 18 U.S.C. 1001 lying to an FBI agent. And General Flynn has now been caught up in what was a trap, an entrapment, and should be allowed to come out. His lawyer, Sidney Powell, filed a motion to vacate the plea. The government concurred. The judge really should say, you're right, it's over.
Let me also add one other thing to this, Jordan, then we'll get back to the point here. So what happened then was Sidney Powell filed a motion to withdraw the plea, take the plea out. That happens in cases. And the Department of Justice had done an independent investigation of all this, and they had made the determination at that point that there was sufficient evidence to support that the prosecution should not have gone forward. that the interviews that took place by the FBI were not appropriate at the time they took place, and that they would join in this motion to withdraw. And that's what got the ire of Judge Sullivan.
That's right. And so when you got that notice there, he now wants to appoint. He has appointed citing what he's calling inherent authority, which is
this is a judge that said 27 times no third parties coming in, and then he appoints
also
one.
He's the trial level judge. He's now giving himself new authority based on inherent authority, which means you can find it there, but you actually won't be able to read it. You won't see any authority granted to me by this. But he's appointed a former judge who's been very much against President Trump, who's a partner at a law firm. I think that actually was a law firm that was linked to defending Sally Yates, right? Yep. Okay. Andy would love that.
That's surprising.
Yeah, that's surprising. Yes. So his law firm was the lawyer sitting with Sally Yates. In fact, was he sitting with Sally Yates? No, it was just his partner. Okay. But he's been given the task by the judge, Dad, not to say, give me your opinion even, which would be weird, but Judge Sullivan told him what to argue.
No, this is what it says. The court is exercising its inherent authority to appoint this amicus, and then the amicus is a retired judge, and then the order says the amicus shall address whether the court should issue an order to show cause why Mr. Flynn should not be held in contempt for perjury pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 401. Basically, that the plea he entered into was not appropriate. Now, we're already getting reactions out of Congress, right? I mean, people are not happy with what the judge is doing. But, the judge initially invited amicus participation. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore.
Yeah, you are getting reaction from Capitol Hill, Chuck Grassley, Lindsey Graham, among others. But, Jay, here's the reaction we need to be hearing more of. Sally Yates works with James Comey and President Obama to hatch a plan to surveil Mike Flynn and to unmask him. And then when it's all unravels and it's in court, the judge appoints Sally Yates, the firm that represented Sally Yates, to take the opposing side. I mean, Jay, a conflict of interest, anyone? That's what Capitol Hill needs to be pointing out because, Jay, they've had these documents a lot longer than we have.
You know what's also interesting? This same judge tossed out the conviction of Senator Ted Stevens in 2009 when it emerged that the government had not produced a slew of what Andy just talked about, this Brady material. But he's operating in a different vein in this case. No question about that.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and take a call.
Yeah, 1-800-684-3110. Let's go to Judith in Connecticut on line 2. Judith, thanks for holding on. You're on the air.
Hi, guys. Thank you. Thanks for taking my call. My reason for calling is that the reason why they're coming unglued, we need to remember 5 days before President Obama took office. As a colored woman, listen what he says. I take notice. He's going to fundamentally change America. So when you fundamentally change something, nobody was looking that he's fundamentally changing America. So they bury all the things in the sand, and they never expected anyone to go retrieve them. So now that they are being retrieved, thank God, because we are praying.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Judith. Now, Judith raises a really interesting point, Dan, and that is what we're uncovering, again, through our FOIA litigation, what's coming out in the court, and our ability to put together these comprehensive timelines.
Absolutely. I mean, the list of names from Rickernell yesterday, a lot of them were very interesting, a lot of the names that people will know. And then there were a lot of names in there, Jay, that no one would recognize except for the ACLJ. Names like Stephanie O'Sullivan and Mike Dempsey. By the way, Jay, another document that we have, this one right here that I'm holding, is a memo from James Comey where he talks about the Oval Office meeting where he, of course, made that memo that eventually leaked. That was planned, of course. Guess who else was in that meeting with James Comey? According to James Comey's own memo, Michael Dempsey. How do we know? Because our FOIA litigation got that document. Jay, Michael Dempsey, he is an unmasker. They're all the same people.
So I'm trying to figure out, Jordan, and I'm going to ask Jordan first on Andy. What do they think? Did they think this was never going to come out? And is this, and we know what the judge is up to, but did they think none of this was going to come out in this unmasking? Going back to that for a minute?
I think so, because I think they thought, that they'll have their security people and their national security advisor would never declassify this kind of information. And Rick Grinnell has ruined their party, and they don't have their protectors in place anymore. Jim Comey got fired. Andrew McCabe got fired by the FBI, too. I mean, he got fired by DOJ, but FBI recommended his firing, the personnel office there. They have no one in there to protect them anymore. They were used to the bureaucracy protecting them. But now President Trump has had the time to get the right people in at the right moment to get this information out. Interesting phone call coming in about the FBI director, current FBI director, Bob, in Florida on line 6. Bob, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Thanks, guys, for taking my call.
Sure.
First and foremost, I love the program, and I share it on Facebook.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
You got it. Here's the question, gentlemen. What can you share, if anything, about Christopher Wray? He's the current director of the FBI. I haven't seen or heard of him since the impeachment days.
Well, look, I mean, he's the current director of the FBI, as you said. We don't necessarily know what he's doing as far as cleanup procedures. There may be all kinds of things, Andy. We just don't know. But the FBI doesn't do everything publicly when they're looking at their own potential misconduct along the way.
No, I give Christopher Wray the presumption that he's trying his best to clean up a colossal mess that he inherited. He used to be an assistant U.S. attorney. He's a person of integrity. It's like being thrown into a cesspool, or dare we say a swamp, and trying to drain the swamp and clean it out. And it's going to take a very long time to do it. And I think slowly by slowly he is attempting his best to do it. I think he's a man of honor and integrity. He's just got a tremendous job to do of cleanup.
Yeah, I think one of the things is we knew from the beginning the Department of Justice, the FBI were the worst. And the intel community. These would be the hardest places to clean up. The bureaucracy is intact. I think, was it Chuck Schumer who said, yeah, go after the FBI and CIA, see what happens to you. Remember he said something like that? Now, a lot of those people have finally been cleared out. The president has faced a special counsel because of that, an impeachment because of that. It failed. But, I mean, Andy, I just go back to you. We only have a minute left before our next segment. We got a couple phone lines open so people can call right now, 1-800-684-3110. This president has faced serious consequences for beginning to drain the swamp.
Oh, no question.
He has.
Yeah, go ahead,
He
Andy.
has. It's. Thank you, Jay. It's a question of arrogance. The arrogance of Comey, the arrogance of Obama, the arrogance, the hubris, as we say in Greek tragedy, of these people who think that they're above the law and can never be held accountable for anything.
All right, folks. Final segment coming up. We're going to get to all of your phone calls. That's what we're going to do is focus on taking your phone calls, answering your question. 1-800-684-3110. Interesting tweet by John Brennan. Getting a little defensive, John Brennan. So we'll get to that tweet.
Can't imagine why.
Well, I got some time to read it. Here it is. John Brennan tweeted, "At real Donald Trump's propaganda and disinformation machine, which operates according to a despot's playbook." So he's calling him a dictator, "is the most aggressive and odious in history. It far surpasses even Russia's ability to trample the truth, harm U.S. security, and undermine America's reputation worldwide." Was that just a tweet about nothing? He just tweeted that? Doesn't like his name being exposed, I guess, Mr. former CIA director, and lots of questions about him.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. And during this time of uncertainty, there's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at aclj.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at aclj.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are our young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
The level of persecution is on the rise. It's being reported more.
We're talking about situations where people are put in jail, threatened with death or life imprisonment, simply because of who they are and what they believe.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. To work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Make a difference today. Support the work of the ACLJ online at aclj.org. Every dollar makes a difference. Give today online at aclj.org.
All right. Very defensive former CIA director, and others. I got to read this tweet again because John Brennan, this is the former CIA director, okay? This is the kind of stuff that they are putting out there about our president of the United States. Same CIA director, by the way, they all testified. They got no evidence of Russia collusion. At real Donald Trump, so President Trump's propaganda and disinformation machine, you're a part of that, folks. That's who he's talking about, which operates according to a despot's playbook. So now he is a dictator, President Trump, who's running an election against a guy who was unmasking his choice to be National Security Advisor, Vice President Biden, and John Brennan, who was an unmasker too. He is the most aggressive and odious in history. It far surpasses even Russia's ability to trample the truth, harm U.S. security, and undermine America's reputation worldwide. You know why it surpasses Russia's in his mind? Because he finally has realized the truth was Russia and the Trump campaign weren't doing anything together.
They all knew that.
So this whole idea of it surpasses Russia's ability to trample the truth and harm you. See how he's trying to bring Russia back in, but now it's you don't even need Russia because Trump is a despot.
All right, we're gonna get to calls in a minute, but we got so much news. We're gonna do our best. But Lindsey Graham just issued a statement, correct?
He did. He said that he is going to convene a series of hearings looking into all of this, everything from FISA and Carter Page to the unmasking to the revelations that Rick Grenell put out. So, Jay, this has gotten the attention of Washington, D.C., and I'll just have to tell you, there's only a couple of reasons for this. One, what Jordan said about the bureaucracy no longer protecting itself, Rick Grenell putting the information out, and Jay, I've got to say it, dating back to 2017, our willingness to engage in litigation that is ongoing to this moment. Inside information and then information that's available to the public that we got, Jay, that'll be at the center of those hearings.
Andy, and I think between the hearings and what's going on now in the court, there's a lot and what John Durham's doing, we're about to get a lot of information.
We're about to get a lot of information, especially from Lindsey Graham's hearings. He's a very tenacious person, a very good senator. He asks a lot of important questions. He has the power of subpoena. We have done it through our FOIA litigation. And then you can just look at the orders that these judges, like Judge Emmett Sullivan, issued, say, and you're going to come up with a parade of horribles that's going to be unbelievable in the history of the nation. And it all starts with Obama. Believe me, the fish begins to stink from the head down.
All right, let's go to the phones, 1-800-684-3110. Julie in California on line 1. Julie, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Jay.
Hey.
I was reading an article, and they noted that no requests for unmasking were made between December 29th and January 4th. And December 29th is the date that Flynn spoke to the Russian ambassador. So January 4th, the FBI decides to shut it down, the investigation of Flynn. No unmasking requests were made for Flynn's name during those times. And the FBI, by January 4th, had the transcript. So it led me and others to believe, in this article, that the name of Flynn was never unmasked in the first place in those transcripts.
It was unmasked on December 28th.
Yeah,
the day before.
Yeah,
and remember, there were multiple phone calls. I think the media tries to focus like there was one phone call of unmasking. There wasn't. Why would Samantha Power have to submit 5 different requests or something like that for unmasking if it was just about one phone call? It wasn't about one phone call. Now, there was a time when the FBI wanted to shut this down, but Peter Strzok wouldn't let them.
Right. And remember,
and Jim Comey
the
didn't want them
FBI
to.
did. The field agents, Andy, came to the conclusion that there was no violation.
That's right. And Strzok said, what do you mean? Hey, you stop that. Keep the razor blade out. Literally use the word razor because that was what the operation was about.
All right, let's go back to the phones, 1-800-684-3110. Laura, also in California, line 3. Laura, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. Thanks for holding on, Laura.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, when will we see some kind of justification for President Trump? I've been following President Trump since the beginning, on Trump train from day one, with a lot of Trump supporters here from California. And we're very upset. We know all this stuff that you've been talking about. We've been hearing about it for 4 years. I mean, we know that all roads lead back to Obama. We knew that from day one. We knew that the Democrats we're all behind this.
Well, here's the issue. You can say that, And I think we all kind of knew that. But if you don't have evidence of it, it doesn't go anywhere.
So now we're getting evidence. So
that's why, Laura.
So, Laura, it takes time.
Hard evidence.
I think this goes back to, congressional hearings don't happen overnight.
Congressional hearings don't happen overnight, neither does FOIA litigation. We've been doing this since 2017. I would say to the last caller, Jay, that vindication for President Trump will come at the ballot box. But I also think there's a very succinct answer to the other caller that wanted to know about this gap. Jay, the bureaucracy had gathered all of this information that we're talking about, and then they went to present it where? At the White House on January 5th. That's why the unmasking began again, because they got the direction, they got the orders from President Obama, and then it started again.
All right. I think we have time to take another phone call, 1-800-684-3110. Shirley in Michigan, interesting question on line 4. Shirley, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Thank you. I'm a supporter of ACLJ, and thank you for fighting for us. My question, do you think that one of the reasons 39 people requested Flynn to be unmasked is if they were ever caught, it would be much harder to discover which one of them leaked it to the press, sort of like flooding the zone?
There were some weird people here, Than. I mean, I still don't know why, like, the Treasury Secretary was involved, why the UN ambassador was so involved, some of the underlings that were involved, why the president's chief of staff was involved. But no, I don't think they ever thought they'd get caught. I think they thought the intelligence bureaucrats will protect us always. They will never disclose our names. And by the way, President Obama brought this on himself by leaking his phone call with his staff, going after Mike Flynn, and then the floodgates open up.
Because they've tried to protect themselves.
And protect the president.
Get to Than's view.
So, Than, they've tried to protect the president, but now we've got the president in the center of the Oval Office telling everybody about what they're going to do to Michael Flynn.
I agree with you that they never thought they'd get caught, Jordan, but this is, I think, why they expanded the access to raw signal intel. I really do, to flood the zone and make sure that this information got out because so many people had it.
This is Chuck Schumer threatening the President of the United States if you try to drain the swamp, specifically the intel community, DOJ, FBI. Take a listen. Flashback to January 3rd, 2017. That was before the president was even sworn into office. Byte 45.
Let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
Andy, the idea that a sitting U.S. Senator would threaten the incoming president of the United States because he was going to get to the bottom of things shows you how deep this is.
It is very deep, and Schumer should be embarrassed and ashamed of himself, but he's made stupid remarks before, threatening Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the steps of the Capitol. We know where you are, and we're going to come and get you. What kind of statements are those to be made by the minority leader? How embarrassing and disgusting that is.
All right, folks, again, I don't think this is done. I think every day we're getting shocking new info, whether it's the judge's decision. We've got into that. We'll get into that more tomorrow. Figure out, is the judge going to allow ACLJ to file amicus? Other groups? What's he doing here?
It doesn't sound like it based on this order, but who knows?
But his other orders sound like it was.
Yes.
So what about those Watergate prosecutors who wanted to impeach President Trump? Now they don't get to file their...
But, my friend John Sale, who was also a Watergate prosecutor, was on TV last night on Fox and said what Judge Sullivan's doing is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, so, again, you get a lot of... This is playing politics with criminal law. The worst. It's like playing politics with the intel community. The worst. Like playing politics with the IRS. The worst. And who is responsible for doing all of that? The past administration. And remember, the past administration's vice president, who did ask for unmasking of Flynn now, is running for president of the United States. I'll talk to you tomorrow.